So Sarah, as you were sitting there thinking about the work you do as a nonprofit,
Yes.
what struck you about what Rob was talking about?
Well, I was really just loving the connection with business and nonprofit and looking at how that can really raise awareness in both camps and how you can really connect through and be a partnership. And I think that is, like you said, kind of a revamping of capitalism and the way corporate America thinks. I think as we walk through that kind of transformation, we're going to see such a huge benefit on both sides.
Yeah, it's interesting. I obviously passionately agree. But mental health, you'd mentioned it, is one of the things that was unspoken about in really most of my upbringing.
Right.
And now if I asked our team what they are most passionate about, this next generation, so I particularly was struck by your focusing on that. And it is the cause that holistically has the most energy in all the different things we support.
Right.
Rob, do you distinguish between, I know we did a little work together some years ago, do you distinguish between what kinds of nonprofits you choose to work for? Because if the theme of this event is kind of doing good and doing well, right, a mission, let me be a little edgy here. You get to say, I don't really like what you guys do, I don't want to work with you, so maybe I say I don't want to work with HundredX because they don't endorse education, innovation, and education freedom.
Yeah, so we're very careful to be nonpartisan, which is hard, as you know, because even, where those lines draw. But we feel like our job is to give the full mosaic of the country. And to get that full mosaic, you really need to make sure you're accessing all ends of the spectrum. There are a couple of causes. There's 1.6 million charities in the U.S., so we don't go hunting for trouble, maybe would be the best way to describe it.
What if we did go hunting for trouble? What if we did go hunting for trouble? What if we were like, you know what, kids are failing and they're not reading at grade level and they're not able to do history. I don't want to work with you because you represent a group that does something different. Maybe on everything else besides education, they take that. Why wouldn't we do that maybe when it comes to education? I mean, to put you on the spot, but would you?
Well, we certainly support all types of schools, all types of faith-based, non-faith-based, all faiths, interfaith, et cetera. But we do tend to avoid the most contentious issues, for better or for worse. It's just a decision we've made. I mean, there's people that are, we're a little bit more in the unifying camp right now. I feel like there's a lot of need for some unity. So I guess candidly, and maybe I'm just a wimp, we tend to not to go, hunt for trouble would be maybe the best way to describe it.
So speaking of contentious, Sarah, I would love for you to share a little bit more. You alluded to it earlier. Your story, and you mentioned not going to school. But when you first told me your story at an event a while ago, I had this picture of Hillbilly Elegy, J.D.
Right.
Vance. And yours is actually a lot even more serious than his was.
Yes. Well, we know now, as our society has grown, and everybody would probably say that education is one of the biggest key factors in breaking generational cycles and patterns. And so we know that across our nation. And now what the studies show is not only is it the education, but it's the right environment for that student. And so my parents, my dad, had some really severe mental health issues and was paranoid schizoaffective. And so his poor experience within the public school system kept him, that generational cycle, from wanting his children to walk that out. We lived in a very poor district in my city, so the opportunity wasn't there to choose. And my parents didn't have the wherewithal to put us in private education. And so they basically just said, we're not going to send our kids to school. And they said they were going to homeschool us, but honestly, neither of them, I think my mom maybe had a few college classes, my dad had his GED, but they were not qualified in resources. We didn't have the internet, we didn't have any of those resources like we do now. But when you look at the whole body mindset, it's not just the education piece. It was the fact that my siblings and I were really trapped in this hotbed of unrest, mental health, addiction, and really emotional trauma every day, all day long, because we didn't go anywhere to get out of that. We didn't see a teacher or an administrator or even another child go over to their house and see that our life was not the norm. And so it wasn't until I was a little bit older when I was able to kind of step out a little bit and realize not everybody's mother locked themselves in their bedroom every day and didn't come out. And not everybody had to follow their mother around the grocery store to make sure that they didn't steal a whole bunch of bottles of Tylenol and go take them in the bathroom before they went home. I thought everybody's life was like that when I was little, but there was something inside of me saying, there's got to be more, but I knew I couldn't see a path out of my situation. And that's why educational freedom and parent choice is a big deal across our nation. Because even though my parents struggled in their own generational cycles with mental health and addiction, they would have raised their hand and said, I want that opportunity for my kids, because even though they weren't providing the most stable environment, my parents loved me. They just didn't know what they didn't know. They were caught in their own trap, in their own generational cycle. And had someone said, you can take your kids and go across the city to this school that my dad deemed, a safer environment, they would have done that. And in fact, my younger siblings that are quite a bit younger than me did receive that opportunity, and they didn't struggle as much with the addiction and the mental health that the rest of us did when we were in that environment. So it's a big piece, frankly, and we're seeing that. We're looking at education through a whole person mindset now, that it's not just one size fits all. I have 6 kids. My kids have been in a wide range of educational opportunities and environments. So we know we have to give parents and caregivers opportunity, but we also have to look at the children through a lens of what fits right for you, what educational path is right for you.
About 22, 23 years ago, there was an effort in Washington, D.C. to bring about a scholarship program for poor parents so that those parents would have the opportunity to send their kids to another school. At the time, Washington, D.C. was not what it is today from the perspective of vibrant economy, people moving there in droves, safety, security, great schools. Actually, the schools have been taken over by the federal government, and then there was a comptroller that was put there, so it was a complete mess. And we would work with parents in the community to organize other parents, and they would come downtown to our office to learn about this stuff. And this one woman walked in one day, and she was with her mother, and she was a single parent. She was about 18 or 19 years old, and she was clearly on something. And in the middle of the conversation, she just put her head down on the table, and her mother said, I know that her daughter, my granddaughter, will do better in another school and will make my daughter better. And people were like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. What did we get it? How is this going to work? They passed the DC Scholarship Program with the help of my associate, Michael Masantes here. They enacted it. She was one of the first people to get choice. I saw the woman a year later at a picnic. She was handing out flowers. She was getting people excited. She was clean because when her daughter went to school and had hope and opportunity, she did better, and she came home, and the mother basically was like, I have to be that person. And she later went on to actually help keep that alive. And so there really is this beautiful connection between when you give somebody a stable, supportive, and exceptional, like high expectations, it doesn't mean you can't learn. Someone just never tried to get them. And you're clearly also an example of that. I wonder, Rob, if you look at your perspective just as a business person and look at the conversation we're having, even outside of 100X, how would you suggest bringing more stories like this to more people so they understand that they have to and they should engage in being mission-centric? And I don't mean not focused on their business. Great businesses create great missions by virtue of their great business, right? But just how do they get engaged in this concept of education opportunity?
Yeah, so we have one of the things that we collect feedback on are the leading nonprofits And to both of your points, the number one thing that people call out is lives changed, right? So yes, mission is important, but where it's really tangible is, do I know this changed a person's life? So I think it's about kind of this pathway. In the nonprofit space where I spent 4 years, our whole thing was we used to count how many hundreds of meals, millions of meals we served. And we brought in Jim Collins, a bunch of other people, and we talked about this pathway of hope. It's like, okay, how are we going to move from serving to serving plus solving? So I think that mindset in the nonprofit, because it used to be counting, right? Counting's okay, but I'm just telling you in our data, it's about the results and lives change and basically measuring it, et cetera. So that's on the nonprofit side. On the for-profit side, we have a lot of data on demographics, and I can tell you the biggest difference is younger consumers versus older consumers. The younger, it's not going to be an option, right? The younger consumers actually, they care about sustainability, social stances, community support, treatment of customers, treatment of employees. So I think in some ways the market's going to almost take care of itself if you want to be relevant in a few years. The biggest demographic shift, if the 50 plus is treatment of customers, community support, and surprisingly sustainability, but some of the others, treatment employees, social stances down the list, there's sort of like, oh, you're lucky to have a job. That thinking is going to end up with you bankrupt. So I think that's a long way. Some of these things are going to take care of themselves, because this conference is, I think, this is going to be 10 years from now, it'll be like, oh, of course, right. Mission.
Well, when I was talking earlier about some of the disruptive innovators in the education portfolio that belongs to the YAS Prize movement, all of those things happened to be there. They weren't what we were looking for in applications. They went through a very competitive grant process, which, by the way, is open until July 15th, yasprize.org. If you're an education provider, do something exceptional for kids. But we found, after seeing their excellence, that they were supporting students in a variety of ways that were not happening in traditional systems in and outside and around schools. And they have this resilient focus on business and how to get their students working, career-ready, they bring those opportunities in. So it's interesting to me when you have a great institution that's related to education, that good business is part of it, good business practices, good outcomes, good holistic stuff. So let me give you the last word, Sarah, on that. How do we go from Hope Rising in Oklahoma to Hope Rising across the country, and where can people find you?
Well, that is a very good question. And I remember looking at our state, because I would say, if you would have asked me 5 years ago that people are inherently born with high hope or low hope, and I would have considered myself a low hope individual and my husband a high hope individual. But what we're learning is, and you alluded to it a little bit, people need purpose. They need a team. They need a community. And there are people that are kind of lone wolves in society and in corporate America and in the nonprofit. But what we find is we're better as a team, and socially we need that encouragement and that support. And so I really believe that as we begin to look through this lens of hope, and we realize when we can step out of ourselves and we realize not everyone around us is just like us, but we have skills that can touch the people, the lives, the teams around us that can offer hope, then I think hope will rise. And I'm getting a ton of questions across the nation from other government organizations, but also other businesses and nonprofits, because in the nonprofit world, that is usually started by someone who feels a calling and a passion, but it can be very wearing on your family, and you're sacrificing so much. So we've worked with a ton of nonprofits on not only how to raise the hope score of the lives that they are touching, but of their own people that are offering day-to-day services to these different communities. And again, in the business world, we all want healthy, happy, productive employees and partners. And how do we do that? with the science of hope by teaching those in our community and recognizing that we all have a part to play. You do not have to have a PhD to raise the hope of those around you, and you do not have to have a life story to raise the hope around you. You can use the skills and the abilities that you have by touching people through relationships and partnering to help companies, communities, nonprofits through the lens of hope and to provide a better future.
I think that's a great way to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.